tokenization is obviously going to be a huge amount in terms of driving the next wave. The UI needs to improve, and there needs to just be like a really simple app where people can interact. Like Coinbase is obviously fantastic at what they do. In Europe, you have Revolut, where it's just seamless and it works really well. I think from a blockchain or crypto perspective, there's been so much focus on the back end and making that really good, where we've kind of forgotten how important the front end is.
Today's Talking Tokenization guest is Kean Gilbert, the head of institutional relations at the Lido Ecosystem Foundation. He leads initiatives to expand institutional access to Ethereum staking, working with custodians, asset managers, ETF issuers, and more. Kean, welcome on.
Jacquelyn, thank you so much for having me. You're very kind.
Yeah, I think the last time we saw each other was in March. And fast forward a few months now, I think the interest towards all of this has probably grown a lot. I don't know if there's anything you've been seeing on your side that has developed over maybe the past quarter or two that you think is noteworthy, maybe to hit the ground running there.
Yeah, it's definitely been busy. That's the first thing I would say. Like a lot of travel, still bouncing around Europe, which is fantastic. I would say the main thing for us that's keeping us pretty busy is the WisdomTree ETP. So you may have seen that in December last year, WisdomTree was the first to launch the Lido staked ETH ETP. So I've been really fortunate to be traveling around with the WisdomTree team around Europe, speaking to different, I suppose, kind of private clients, institutions who want to get exposure to ETH through like an ETP or an ETF style wrapper.
Mm-hmm. What has been the interest for something like that?
It's been really positive. So the product launched in December, like I said. I think we've already grown, or I should say the WisdomTree product has grown 25% so far. So the product was seeded with 50 million. Interest has been really strong. And like I'm quite proud of that because I think we spent about a year and a half speaking to WisdomTree, getting comfortable with the product. I think we actually answered something like 450 questions for WisdomTree to make sure they were actually comfortable with Lido, liquid staking, and ETH. So for it to kind of get this reception right out of the gates has just been terrific.
Yeah, I mean, what were some of those questions, if you could say? Or like, what were the things that made them decide to work with you guys? Because I'm sure there were a lot of, companies on that side, like both sides of the coin, right? You guys chose to work with them, but they also chose to work with you. And I know it's been like about 6 months since, that deal or partnership closed, right? But I think a lot of times people are wondering, like, how does that actually work on the back end,
Yeah, well, definitely a lot of calls. That was the first thing. I think I
Sure.
probably spoke to WisdomTree probably every week. And like I said,
Yeah,
450 questions, which is definitely tough.
that's a lot of
Um,
questions. Yeah.
yeah, like the questions were definitely wide ranging. So like with the case of Steve, like one of the big topics was liquidity. So making sure that, okay, if this product is going to be 100% staked, does Steve have the depth of liquidity to meet redemption requirements? That was one big topic that came up. Um, the second would probably be just getting them comfortable working with a DAO. So obviously Lido is quite unique in the sense of the Lido protocol. It's governed by a DAO. It's not a traditional business like most companies typically deal with, like an LLC. So getting them comfortable with that domain was a big part of it. And then the third part is probably like the diversification. So effectively with Lido, it's a middleware. Nothing is actually staked with it. In the back end, you have 900 different node operators. Whereas I suppose traditional staking ETPs and ETFs, it's a single node operator within a custodian. So the dynamic with Lido is quite different. So I'd say they were the type of questions we were getting. And then again, like any good company, they're doing a significant amount of due diligence on like how we deal with situations, whether it's slashing, whether it's infrastructure support, where it's located. We went through that kind of full array or gambit of questions with them.
Hmm. So Steve, you mean staking Ethereum, right? I want to make sure you clear
Lido,
that up. Lido
Lido's
staking
staked ETH.
Ethereum. Staked ETH,
Yes.
yes. Okay, yes. And then I wanted to ask you on the front of Steve, am I pronouncing that
Mhm.
correctly?
Yeah.
What is the interest for something like that today? And has it changed materially since, let's say, like a year ago?
The interest is quite strong. So for context, like Lido is the largest liquid staking protocol, around 20 billion TVL. So from definitely like a retail perspective, like Lido has been hugely successful. I suppose what I was brought on to do was to help, I suppose, mirror that success or grow that success from an institutional aspect. So a lot of the clients or the users that we would speak to, they were just natively staking their ETH. And one of the big issues with native staking is that you're effectively taking your ETH, you're locking it away, and you might be getting circa 3%. There's obviously benefits in that. You're obviously securing the network for Ethereum, which is really important. But for a lot of institutions, locking away a significant amount of capital and only getting 3%, it may not be that exciting. And that's effectively where Lido comes in with liquid staking. So our pitch to them is effectively you're getting the benefits of securing the network, the 3% staking rewards rate, but we offer you liquidity. So in the sense of you can take that stETH, deploy it into DeFi, use it as collateral, or in the case of if you want to get out of your position, instead of waiting for the exit queue, you can easily swap your stETH into USDC.
What is the liability Lido's taking on then by allowing them to move it around freely like that?
I wouldn't say there's liability in such terms like that. Like any protocol, there's smart contract risk. Obviously, again, like Lido being a middleware, like the node operators, that comes with a level of slashing risk. But like Lido's been around for such a long time, it's battle tested. I think we spent something like $4 million on smart contract security. We recently received like an A+ rating for a number of different providers. So like security and testing is like a huge part of kind of what Lido is about.
You also mentioned before Lido is a DAO, and we had a cross protocol, their co-founder Hart Lamber on a while ago when they were kind of considering that proposal. If you remember the bridge across proposal where they wanted to convert their business from a DAO structure to a private company. And something that he said at the time, and I don't know if Lido has felt similarly, maybe not because the conversation you mentioned with WisdomTree, but he was saying that having the DAO structure actually made it harder for them to work with enterprise businesses or more traditional businesses because they didn't really fully grasp it. I don't know if that's something that you're seeing too. And if so, like how do you guys kind of manage like, educating people on what a DAO is? How does it work when you work with them and things like that?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but I think it's obviously surmountable, like in the sense of what we've done with WisdomTree and BitGo, Fireblocks and Copper.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it just takes more time. Like you said already, it's kind of education. We just have to get them comfortable with the idea. Um, in terms of kind of the obvious workaround that we have, like Lido has a number of different ecosystem foundations. So effectively, if we were to sign at the simplest of level an NDA, these institutions would go to the foundation. That foundation would then sign an NDA. So we do have kind of traditional, I suppose, structures in the back end, but the overarching element is the DAO, and the DAO ultimately dictates what's happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's fair. Also, this, as you know, this episode is part of the tokenization series. And, we've had a lot of different guests on, WisdomTree included, but like BlackRock, PayPal, other people, right? And they all have different takes on tokenization and what it really means for the industry. How are you kind of thinking about that today when it comes to, Ethereum staking? And then maybe at a high level, how would you define tokenization?
Yeah, like I would say at a high level, and I've definitely stolen this quote from someone far more intelligent than myself, but it's basically like turning real assets into internet assets. And that quote always kind of stuck with me. But general kind of day-to-day stuff from my perspective around tokenization, conversations wouldn't come up too frequently, especially since we're kind of the staking company or the staking guys from that regard. But personally speaking, I can definitely see like the ramp up of tokenization is just going to be incredible. I was pretty fortunate, like I've been in crypto for around 10 years. So I remember when the whole conversation of tokenization started, it was quite niche. And then I think a couple of months ago, I was fortunate. I was at an ETF event in Dublin where EY was hosting all these different ETF issuers. And the number one topic for the entire day was tokenization. Like I never thought in my wildest dreams I would go to like a traditional asset management conference and the entire topic would be about tokenization and crypto and blockchain. Like it does show how far we've come in that space of time.
Yeah. So do you find that space complementary then to what you guys do then? Because obviously they're different to your point, right?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely complementary. Like the two worlds coexist. Like a lot of people kind of get concerned of when they hear like a BlackRock and Fidelity getting in the space, does that not cannibalize the value? And in reality, I don't think that's true. Like ETFs and ETPs, they're just traditional wrappers. But on the back end, these ETFs are holding crypto, which is fantastic. Like it's allowing people to get exposure to a space or to a product that they may not typically have had the experience to do. Like I've kind of definitely seen that like it's very easy to just go set up a brokerage account, buy one unit of the WisdomTree product, and they're managing everything on the back end. They're dealing with the custodian, the index, the insurance, and they're doing all that for 50 bips. Whereas someone, if you want to be a little bit more on chain, managing a wallet, um, keys, there's complexity in that. And there's obviously a risk in the sense of if you lose your keys, you lose your crypto. Whereas with the ETF example, there's a lot more security and I suppose fallback if things go wrong.
Yeah. And when we say institutions, what does that mean for you? Who are these institutions? I feel like it's kind of like a catch-all term, right?
Yeah, it's definitely catch-all the way we would use it in Lido.
Yeah.
Like the joke before was like anyone who wears suits. That was the whole thing internally we used
Yep.
to say. But I think it's so changed. Like for me, we would typically be focusing on big liquid funds. DATs are now definitely a big institutional narrative or focus for us. That wouldn't have been the case 2 years ago. Um, Crypto exchanges would be another big focus, and then custodians. So specifically different qualified custodians or MPC wallet providers like Fireblocks. They would be the kind of core element that we would focus on from like a Lido perspective.
hmm Out of all those categories, which one do you think is bringing in the most interest slash demand?
Oh, that's a good one. I think the DATs are probably a pretty big hot topic right now, like how they will coexist with ETFs. I think that's going to be an interesting narrative to play out.
hmm
Um, from a selfish perspective, the biggest focus for us would be the different qualified custodians. So the Fireblocks of the world, the BitGos, the Anchorages, the Coinbase.
hmm
We've definitely kind of heard feedback from clients that look, if the asset doesn't have custody support at the custodian, they won't touch it.
hmm
So from my perspective, effectively in a sales or a BD role, like having close relationships with these custodians is really important because
hmm
we're trying to build an ecosystem around Lido, specifically an institutional one, and the custodians just play a huge part in that.
Yeah. Why are the custodians so important for people who may not understand that?
So, like in simple terms, like these big institutions, they tend not to self-custody. They kind of outsource that to a qualified custodian. And these guys are basically the professionals of what they do, managing crypto. So again, like BitGo is probably a great example. Like we would have a
Yeah.
native integration with BitGo where their clients can go on the BitGo console, select Lido as a staking provider and stake their ETH. They've made it
hmm
incredibly easy from a custody perspective and a staking perspective as well.
Right. And then how would you say institutions are approaching staking today compared to, other options like maybe yield strategies, ETFs, like you mentioned, these other categories that, provide some returns but aren't necessarily staking?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the institution, to be honest. Like, we would
Mhm.
speak to a lot of kind of big banks in Europe and they hold crypto, but they're holding it via an ETP or an ETF. They can't go on chain yet. So for them, that's fantastic. Like I've always kind of viewed staking as like the risk-free rate. So there's really no point in holding ETH or unstaked ETH. You want to have staked ETH. And I think that narrative is starting to pick up a lot of attention. Like we've obviously seen what's happening in DeFi. People are definitely taking a kind of a risk off approach right now, I think, in the market. Whereas staking, you're effectively just using Ethereum, you're securing the network and you're getting that 3% rewards rate as a bonus. So we're definitely
Mhm.
seeing a lot more interest from a staking perspective right now, especially in terms of how the market has developed over the past kind of 2 months.
Yeah. How does risk play into all that? Because you're talking about just like people being risk off, right? And I would imagine like bull versus bear markets, it varies kind of the demand there and then like the risk appetite as well.
Yeah, like I would definitely say smart contract auditing risk management has become a huge topic for clients over the past 2 months. Like people are asking us like how much we spent on smart contract auditing, who are the auditors that we've used. We spent a significant amount of time working with like third party kind of certification firms like Credora. We recently got like Web3 certification. So these are like, again, from a selfish sales perspective, I can then present them to clients and say, here's an A plus, here's another A plus, and here's another A
Yeah.
plus. And it just makes them a lot more comfortable. Like I
Yeah.
know people kind of joke that like people in crypto have a short memory when it comes to hacks. I do kind of feel it's different this time. I don't think people
Mm.
are going to forget as easily as they once did.
Yeah. Why is that?
Maybe if you get burned too many times, you start learning a lesson.
Yeah, that is fair.
Like,
Yeah. Okay, so we got the A plus side of things. What is an
mhm.
F side of things?
For Lido, I don't think there is any, which is fantastic.
Okay.
I
Maybe
would
from what
say,
you've
yeah.
observed in the market then.
Oh, I would say people not doing basic smart contract auditing has been a big thing. And especially with the attention that AI is getting, like how can you leverage AI to make your smart contracts more secure? Um, yeah, I can definitely say people have invested, or at least friends of mine have invested money. And when you ask them, like, have you done any due diligence on the smart contracts, whether it's audited, it tends to be no. They
Mm.
tend to just look at what's the APY for that given product. Whereas institutions, it's the polar opposite. They want to look at the security, the protections around it. Maybe if there's a dedicated insurance fund, they won't sacrifice security for a couple of extra bips, is my experience from an institutional perspective.
Yeah, we had a conversation with SharpLink CEO who talked about that as well. And he's like, when we're shopping this around, like the smart contract risk and like other factors on just kind of like the risk probably parameters. He would say it much better than I did, but like that is all at play. And like when institutions are considering these things, they're considering like so many different factors, right?
Yeah.
But when you're chatting with your friends, maybe what do you tell them then? You're like, you shouldn't just like go for something with the highest number. You should go for something
Yeah.
serious, legitimate, like
Yeah, like I've always been quite consistent to everyone I meet, like Bitcoin and ETH, that's it. Like that's always been kind of my strategy. And just be consistent, think long term. But I'd also say it's probably an age thing.
mm,
Guys maybe a bit younger, they're looking for a home run, especially in traditional markets when you're only getting 2 or 3%. You can be quite easily drawn into the idea of getting 20% or crazy DeFi looping strategies. Like everyone's appetite for risk is quite different, but I would say a younger generation is probably a lot more risk on than someone who, like Joe Shalom and SharpLink, a lot more
mhm,
experienced, seasonal. He's gone through those different stages of the market, and he obviously appreciates the value of being a little bit risk off and how important the security angle is when you're making investment decisions.
mhm.
Because ultimately, like you can't, like I'd imagine in Joe's world, like you can't insure against reputational risk. So losing money from a hacking, that's just something you don't want to take on, or you'll try and mitigate as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, for sure. Is it beneficial to you then if people are a bit more risk on?
I wouldn't say beneficial. Like it obviously is good. People are probably using Steve more as collateral, where the market is right now, like in sense of risk off, and people are doing a lot more due diligence on the back end. That's where it's really beneficial for us because I can say all these different A plus gradings and I can send them all these different PDFs to say how great we are. I think there's very few protocols or liquid staking protocols that can do that. Like
Hmm.
Lido has made a significant amount of investments in making sure the protocol is as secure as possible. I think times like this, that's where it really pays off because that's where people start double clicking on, okay, what's actually happening with the smart contracts? Are these guys serious people? And ultimately, like, is the protocol battle tested? And Lido can definitely say it is battle tested.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you see staking ultimately becoming more and more integrated with the traditional financial uh, products, companies, market, etc.? And if so, what does that look like ultimately compared to where we are today?
Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer, to be honest. Like, why would you leave a 3% rewards rate on the table? Like I've spoken to a lot of clients and they're like, no one should hold ETH. It should always be staked. And I think the institutional element around how staking will get integrated has already started, like with the ETFs. That's probably a great example, like ETHB in the US, the WisdomTree product in Europe. DATs again, like SharpLink you mentioned. You obviously have BitMine and a couple of others. There are going to be really easy ways for institutions to get staking more involved. But it's definitely the beginning. I think like you'll have the big institutions in Europe and the US finding new creative ways to get staking built into their products. It's only a matter of time.
Yeah, you brought up Europe. How do you think about regional differences here? Because I would imagine it's not the same across like the Americas, Europe, APAC, LATAM. I would imagine the interest is different across each category, right? Or
Yeah.
tell us what
No,
you
you're
think
absolutely right.
or see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like Europe, from a staking perspective, Europe is fantastic. Like staking has been in European ETPs for a number of years. Whereas obviously the US has only kind of got staking up and running over the past year. So from my perspective, like being in Europe, speaking to different ETP issuers, it's been great. Like the big thing in Europe has been what percentage of the product is being staked. So typically in Europe, the staking rate of the products might be anywhere between 40 to 60%. They'd leave maybe 40 to 50% unstaked for redemption or liquidity purposes. So when I was kind of going on this mission with colleagues, speaking to different issuers, we were basically offering them the ability to have a 100% stake product. So that narrative was fantastic. Like it's very easy for me to go into a sales meeting and say, you can go from 50 to 100 using staked ETH. So that's been great. The US, I would say, has been a little bit more challenging in the sense of how the regulation was over there. There was definitely kind of a wait and see approach. But that's opening up right now. It's definitely changing. Like you may have seen that like VanEck recently filed the S1 form for Lido staked ETH ETF. So speaking to the VanEck guys quite closely on that. And then I would say from an Asian perspective, again, it's quite different. Singapore, Hong Kong, quite different geographically, quite different from I suppose, a strategy perspective or a policy perspective, I should say. Like we have people on the ground in Singapore, they're having excellent conversations, but it just takes so much time and education.
Yeah. So then what would you say is the timeline for adoption across the board, across all the regions? So like a global expansion here.
Oh, I wish I knew the answer. I I think like anything, people overestimate in the short term and underestimate in the long term. So like I've been doing this 10 years. So like there is always these moments where you kind of have to shake yourself and like, wow, we're actually making a huge amount of progress, but it's just taking longer than we expect. And I think staking is going to be a little bit like that. It's only coming to the forefront of an institutional conversation right now. These guys, these institutions, they do a significant amount of DD and due diligence and everything they do, and they place big bets for the long term. But these big long term bets, they take a lot of time from an infrastructure perspective to implement. But I definitely think we'll get there.
Yeah. I mean, then what would you say is kind of the way you look at the market going forward with everything going on right now in the current market state? I don't know how you would categorize it. I would still say it's kind of bearish. I don't know. People are optimistic, but prices are
Yeah.
bearish, right?
Yeah. Like I would always be or try to be like a glass half full type of guy. Like again,
Yeah.
if you're in crypto long enough, you're just gonna have to know this is a cycle. And like you said, we're probably in a bear cycle right now, but this is like the prime opportunity to be building and like put your head down and do real work. Like I definitely saw that when I was at Consensus, when the price of ETH went down. Like the motto from Joe is always just head down, go build, and then when things pick up, you have something amazing that you can actually launch or present to the market.
Yeah. I mean, the price of Ethereum isn't too hot, right? So how do you think about that in terms of like, getting people to come stake while also acknowledging that it's down from all-time highs?
Yeah, like I wouldn't focus on the price too much, which I know can be a cliche to say. Like my main focus is on getting ETH in the door. So my kind of view is that if I can bring as much ETH as possible to Lido, eventually that will be reflected in the price. I think you can lose a lot of sleep by checking coin market cap every single day. I'd rather just keep the head down, do work, and eventually that will be reflected.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I also wanted to ask you a bit about ETF interest. Are investors still really drawn to that? Because I know they launched in the US for us specifically back in January of 2025. Huge interest on the front of spot Bitcoin ETFs. And then we saw Ethereum ones roll out and some other ones too, right? How would you kind of categorize that today? Because I know you're talking to ETF issuers as well.
I think it's pretty good. Like again, with the WisdomTree product in Europe, it's grown 25% in terms of AUM. Like it would obviously be
Mhm.
fantastic for the price of ETH to increase by 25% as well, but I think we'll get there. Um, from a US perspective, I do have kind of some sympathy with the American ETF issuers because the market is quite different. Like in European ETP, they tend to be more institutional audiences, or that's what the products are designed for. Whereas in America, I think the ETF space is a lot more for retail. And I think the retail side in the US is probably, like you said, quite bearish. There may not be a lot of disposable income, or I think the other aspect is that it's so easy to go to a Coinbase or a Kraken and get exposure to Bitcoin and ETH that way and not pay a total expense ratio, even though it might be 50, maybe 25 bips. So I think that's
Mhm.
probably where the dynamic in the US is very different. It's a retail targeted product, whereas in Europe it's an institutional targeted product, and they're quite happy to pay the 50 bips.
Mhm. How important is retail to you guys?
And it's hugely important. Like I think one of the smart things that Lido did, whether it was intentional or not, was to go retail first because that allowed us to build a big TVL and that depth of liquidity. I've definitely kind of seen competitors in the past try and do the institutional part first, but it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. The institutions won't come unless you have that depth of liquidity. So for me,
Mhm.
it's very easy to go, look, Lido is extremely successful from a retail perspective. There's a good depth of liquidity there. You can now leverage that retail depth of liquidity for your institutional purposes.
Mhm. So do you think for other teams in the space that is the route that they should be going, whereas like some of them are just diving straight headfirst towards institutions?
I think from a liquid staking perspective, the depth of liquidity is so important. Like that's definitely the
Yeah.
biggest moat that Lido has. Like no one is close to us in terms of depth of liquidity. So again, when I go speak to ETF issuers and different liquid funds, they kind of want to know two things: how much they can sell, and how long it takes to sell. And there's really no one close to Lido in that regard.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, Keen, what else do you see as like the biggest unlock when it comes to the next wave of adoption then? Like maybe looking forward.
Yeah, I think tokenization is obviously going to be a huge amount in terms of driving the next wave. Like for me, I still kind of believe like the UI needs to improve, and there needs to just be like a really simple app where people can interact. Like Coinbase is obviously fantastic at what they do. In Europe, you have Revolut where it's just seamless and it works really well. I think from a blockchain or crypto perspective, there's been so much focus on the back end and making that really good, where we've kind of forgotten how important the front end is. And I think for the next big wave of adoption, there just needs to be a nice, seamless kind of front end that works really well. Or the other thing that kind of comes up a lot is like the privacy piece. Like if I share with you my wallet address, you can quite easily go on Etherscan and just double click on all the assets I hold. Whereas in a normal world, you can't see into my bank account. And I definitely think that's going to be another thing that has to be addressed to kind of drive mass adoption.
Hmm. Yeah. Is that something Lido's working on?
It's not something we're working on, but I'm sure there's definitely intelligent people in the space that are focusing on it.
For sure, for sure. Fair. Okay. You brought up tokenization too, and I mean, we've kind of weaved it into this conversation as well. But how does that interest, impact business operations and demand for you guys as well? We talked about earlier how it might be complementary and not necessarily competing, right? But what does that ultimately mean in terms of tokenization expanding interest there, and for Lido's side?
Yeah, like I don't know if it will directly impact, but one thing I can say is like if you have a tokenization department in a big institution that probably sits
Hmm.
within like the crypto team or their blockchain team, which ultimately that is fantastic. Because
Hmm.
again, I remember 10 years ago, like no company had a blockchain or crypto team. Now every major bank or every major institution has a digital assets team. They probably have a tokenization person. Like, I think that's the really exciting part. Ultimately, you want to see these departments grow and scale, and then suddenly different conversations come into that. Like, big
Yeah.
banks will have staking people, they'll have tokenization people, they may even have DeFi people. And I think that's where it will really start benefiting protocols like Lido, where you can have really intelligent conversations. And that means that kind of the sales cycles for the type of work I do get reduced because they're educated. You don't need to tell them effectively what we're doing. They already know.
Yeah. Are you seeing that today already?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Like, I remember 10 years ago, if you had an hour long meeting with a client, you'd spend the first 15 minutes talking about blockchain, the other 15 minutes talking about Bitcoin, and trying to educate them that they're different. Like, blockchain is a technology and Bitcoin is a use
Hmm.
case for it. So it's very hard to kind of go from education to opening your wallet. They have to ultimately be comfortable of that. And I think
Yeah.
now none of the client conversations I have start with what is blockchain, what is Ethereum, what is staking. They're a lot more like, okay, how diversified is the network? They tend to be a lot more of an advanced conversation.
That's great, honestly. I guess, what do you think is driving that then?
I think, again, it's like anything in life, time. Like, I think a lot of people thought Bitcoin would have disappeared right now. But
Mm.
I think, again, it's proven it's here to stay. Like, I'm
Yeah.
a great believer that, like, the Black Rocks of the world, the Fidelities, they don't place bad bets. So if you have these big institutions where they're taking the technology incredibly seriously, that makes other institutions and other people take note.
Yeah. Amazing. Are you talking to BlackRock and Fidelity in these firms?
Well, it's funny. I was looking at one of your podcasts today with Max Stein. So I used to work with Max. So Max is a really good friend of mine. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
speak to Max all the time.
All right, there we go. That was more of a
Yeah.
candid answer, but I'll take it. Max was a good guest. He was a very good
Yeah.
guest. Yeah. And it's interesting to see kind of BlackRock's like evolution into the space too. I believe they just launched like a second fund recently, an Ethereum focused one. Don't quote me on that. I should know this better, but
Yeah. They
yeah.
definitely have ETH A and then ETH B, which is a staking product. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. See, you knew it better than I did. All right.
Yeah.
Keen, what is something that you're watching right now that you think others should pay attention to aside from everything that we've discussed?
On Netflix or Disney Plus.
Honestly, some people
Um,
do answer the question that way. So, like, if you want to go that
yeah.
route, you can, or you can
No,
go more industry. But
I'm definitely not watching anything on Netflix at the moment. I'm rewatching stuff. Um, but from a work perspective, I don't know. Like, I'm kind of fortunate. Like, if you surround yourself with really good
Mhm.
people will send you the right stuff to read. And like, we have, I don't know, obviously a big kind of Slack channel. The amount of great knowledge that comes from that by just a group of people finding stuff, effectively crowdsourcing information, I've always found that the best way.
Mhm.
So I'd never say there's one kind of source of truth. I would say like there's probably a Telegram group that you're in, or in my case, a Slack channel where people are just constantly feeding new information. And that's always been the way I've been learning more about crypto and what's happening in the space.
Yeah. Anything interesting you've learned recently?
God,
What's in the
hey,
Slack channel, in the Lido Slack channel?
it's probably far from exciting. It's all staking related.
Yeah.
So obviously the kelp stuff, that was a hot topic.
Yeah. The
Um,
Kelp exploit. Hmm.
Yeah, so it's that type of thing. It's probably not the most exciting thing. I'd probably be
Exciting to you
more,
guys.
yeah, I'd probably rather be on Netflix, to be honest. But it's
Yeah.
interesting. It's good.
Yeah.
There's worse
Fair enough.
jobs to have. I'm very lucky.
Okay, last thinking then. Can you leave us with a piece of advice, something that you've carried with you throughout your time in the space?
The best advice I ever got was think long term. Short term benefits are worthless. And I've always kind of taken that to my career. I think too many people, especially people maybe my age, they want the quick win, this kind of maybe millennial mindset of free perfect now, and that's great. But
Hmm.
ultimately, if you think long term, you'll have far more success.
Yeah, I love it. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Super, Jacquelyn. Thank you so much for hosting.